Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Terre homicust. Bonjour. Welcome back to this second day. Good to see the crowd again, and good morning, of course, to everybody out there following the live stream, wherever that is. Technical issue. For those of you, and I guess all of you are on Works Up. Can we have the slide? You need to go on to Works Up and select day 2. Today is the 13th of October. So, because we expect you here and everybody out there, millions of people following the live streaming, to send us many questions, yeah? So, I think without further ado, Luc.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Let's start. Good morning, everybody. How do you feel? Ready for action? Okay. I was asked by the Estonian presidency to do 2 things. To wake you up and to introduce a new directive to you. Yesterday evening, the European Union launched a new directive. Interesting stuff, I must say. It's a directive based on research done by Eurostat. Eurostat did some research on conferences. People applaud a lot during conferences. And Eurostat discovered that, in fact, we waste hours and hours and hours when you add up all these long applauses. So there is a new austerity measure implemented by the Commission. We go for short applause from now on. So I need your support. Give me a standard applause, please. 5-6 seconds. Give me an enthusiast applause. Oh, perfect. Now the directive. The directive says from now on, when we need to speed up, when we need time, we go for the short applause. I will show you how it goes, and then we practice a bit. Short applause. Okay, let's try it. Short applause. Perfect. Perfect. Very good. Technical information. We're gonna sell a smartphone. No, seriously, we found it in the toilet. Is it? Men's toilet? Men's toilet. Nobody's? It's only €5, huh? Nobody's? Well, the organizers have it, so if you want it back, you can have, yeah, okay. Oh, I had to say something extra about this new directive. It is called the Applause Accountability Act. AAA. Okay, let's start. This morning we will have, I think, a very interesting session. We will look at innovative solutions and financial frameworks that trigger positive change. We will look at technology. We will look at how to involve people themselves and how to work on financial frameworks. And we start with technology, and the organizers have prepared a very interesting video clip on the role that technology could play in the future. Can we have the video clip, please?
I think it can work. I think it's something interesting to look into. I think they're still going to need to have humans around, right? You still need to have that human connection. But the ability to have some other way to help them, it sounds like a good option. Yeah,
right. You can't replace a human connection, but if robots are able to help support the cause, sounds good.
I could imagine that it would be a robot because I think it's really efficient, but I don't think that my parents would be fine with that. I think it's our generation who can live with this, but not our parents or aunts or something like that. Any comments?
No, it's fine. I think robots would help and would be perfect for me. But I see a difference between our generation or an older one. Maybe there are some people older who say, okay, let's try. And I think the main people will say, oh, go away with that. Yeah, I don't want to have a robot at home. So, yeah.
Well, perhaps you never know what happens in the future. Perhaps. Yes, it could be, yes, robots or something. Yes.
I don't think so. I don't know. I think if I was that person who had a disability, I wouldn't, like, I'd prefer an actual person to be communicating or like helping me. I think it's probable and possible that like that kind of thing will exist in the future. But I think it probably will take away from, like, it's a bit, not dehumanizing, but it's maybe a bit isolating if you're just contacting with somebody who's not an actual person.
Thank you. I would like to invite our three speakers for this morning session on stage. Mr. Gianluca Misuraka, is that more or less correct? Misuraka, please join us on stage. Madam Gerli Ivik, please, and Madam Adriana Sukova-Tosheva, please join us here on stage. And the first presentation will be about technology, ICT, enabling social innovation, potential and impact. We look forward to this presentation, and like yesterday, we will have the three presentations and then there will be a brief Q&A. Mr. Gianluca, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. And first of all, thanks to the organizer for the invitation, and always a pleasure to be in Estonia, or better in e-Estonia, we should say. And I was pleased to see how many progresses has been made over the years. As the Australian comedian last night, I also came my first time in Tallinn 11 years ago, and things have been advancing very rapidly. So we are really taking advantage of the technological revolution. So also, I promise we didn't arrange it in advance, but it's very good that the video showed a possible future, and I will also try to bring you into the future, as my presentation will also deal with that. How it goes?
The green button. Yeah. This, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, in fact, my duty this morning is to present you some results of the research I've been leading in the past 4 years together with colleagues from DG Employment on ICT-enabled social innovation, promoting social investment, and I will give a specific focus to the topic of active healthy aging and independent living that is linked to the topic, the main topic of the conference. But also, I'll try to bring you into the future as we are also in an urgent need to define what kind of future we want to leave to our children and the children of our children. And this is because, and yesterday it came quite importantly on the stage, the issue of aging and the fact that population is aging. We are all aging in Europe and in the world, and there will be a growth in the numbers, also because and also because of the technological impact. The digital transformation of work is also giving some changes in the way we will work in the future. So there will be an impact on the care system and on the way the professionals of the care system work that have huge effects on the sustainability and of the welfare systems. So I will be back on this because our claim and what we have found through research is that ICT-enabled social innovation that we define as a new configuration of social practices that tend to better answer societal challenges is supporting the modernization of social protection systems and also the social investment approach in different areas from child care up to active healthy aging, passing through all the personal social service of general interest. But in particular, in the area of active healthy aging and long-term care, it can increase efficiency, reduce the cost, and so going back to the debate of yesterday on the cost-benefit, this is now becoming more and more evident. And also, last night we had a discussion with Professor Quinn on transhumanity, and he mentioned yesterday the fact that the future will be based on personalization and individualization, and we will look at this also later on, but definitely ICT can help personalizing, targeting the services. This is because of the possibility to exploit the huge potential of data that we all have now at disposal. So there are a number of initiatives, and I won't go into detail, but just remember for the end Esther. So what is best for Esther? But also we've seen many cases where actually either we can integrate health and social care in a very effective way. So we have cases from the Badalona Service Asistencial in Catalonia in Spain, more or less, and in the Soteria project in Athens in Greece, where really harnessing the power of technology and the data integrating through personal health record and social care record, there are better offer of services. Or let's say more low-tech initiative like Voisinage in France, where they are building communities of elderly and younger people that work together to better offer better services and also have less isolation of the older people in the communities, in the neighborhood. Or more advanced future-oriented pilots like CROSS that based on a kind of blockchain technology try to serve non-monetary services, so like time banks and others activities to migrants, disadvantaged youth or elderly people in several cities in Europe. Now, how we came out with these, let's say, findings through the building of what we call the IESI knowledge base, the ICT-enabled social innovation knowledge base. That is a database we have built in the past 3-4 years together with DG Employment, where we have over 600 initiatives across Europe and also beyond. And we have analyzed most of them, well, half of them that have some proven, some evidence of the outcome and the impact, because this is a big barrier in this topic, because we often are moving targets and it's difficult to measure or there is little scientific or evidence of the results. And in particular, we have been looking at many initiatives, including in the area of social inclusion, for instance, for disability, that has been talked a lot yesterday, or empowering users in different difficult conditions, but also in more mainstream services like education or employment, employability, childcare and social care, and in particular in the area of active healthy aging. I mean, the sample is not statistically representative, but it illustrates how diverse and rich is the ICT-enabled social innovation landscape in Europe. And then we have analyzed this according to what we call the IESI knowledge map. So we look at several dimensions, in particular the potential for ICT-enabled innovation that they have, and the level of service integration, so the role of governance, and I will be back on this. In fact, if we look at the specific case of ICT-enabled social innovation for active healthy aging, we see that it is an area where we have a very strong innovation potential. Many cases have a disruptive or even radical innovation possibility that transform the way care is delivered. And also there are high level of service integration at the level that we call of intersectoral collaboration. So it's not only the public sector also often is in the driving seat, but is when it works in collaboration with different stakeholders from the third and the private sector that, let's say, things happen in a more interesting way. And look at the interesting things. The game-changing role of ICT is present in most of these initiatives, especially when it comes to independent living, but also in the area of health promotion and rehabilitation and prevention, and as well in integrated health and social care, where it's becoming more or less mainstream, although there are still debate on the cost effectiveness of certain solutions. So in practice, ICTs drive this organizational transformation of the service delivery because exactly can facilitate the collaboration, the synergies, the strengthening cooperation, and aligning the resources and the needs, so generating quite important saving. Factors that then make management systems more productive and the care processes more efficient. So more practically, what are we talking about when we talk about ICTs to support independent living? There are a range of technologies, not only telehealth or e-health or telecare, but others also with maybe a less prominent role, but that actually are trying to empower the users and with different restrictions so that they can have a better quality of life and more independent living. And at the same time, important to stress, reduce the cost of, for instance, having them cared all day in an hospital or in a hospice. So there are examples, as I say, many. Some are more well-known and studied, like the telecare development program in Scotland that has been analyzed and evaluated as a pilot project, and then now is a scale-up at the national level in Scotland. And it started in the late 90s as a government-sponsored initiative, and there's a number of impact that has been, let's say, scientifically proven with counterfactual impact evaluation and analysis. And interesting to see the huge savings in terms of, pounds, almost 80 million pounds in a 5-year period. Or if we want to see from a different perspective, in the Limousin region in France, the use of smart homes and telecare is actually helping providing services to elderly people that may have difficulties to improve their independence and their capacity. And so these also have an interesting business model because it works in a public-private partnership model that allows it for a long-term implementation. As I said, governance is important for facilitating service integration because it is when we combine funding, administrative and service delivery systems that you can have a better impact, and you have a number of options that are more often, quite always facilitated by ICT. That can be basic, let's say, spreadsheet sharing or more advanced technologies. This is also confirmed by some of the data we see from our sample that shows that ICT-enabled social innovation in this area that, as I said, is characterized by independent living, initiatives promoting independent living, integrated care and prevention and rehabilitation is quite pervasive in certain cases, or intersectoral integrated. Now, the other keyword of this conference is dignity, and how can we actually use ICT-enabled social innovation to increase dignity, and through also enabling community-based services. There are a number of examples here. I brought one from Italy that is actually a collaboration between a foundation and a private sector, a private company that developed a cloud technology to manage more effectively home care service for chronic patients. Here we're talking about, people affected by cancer, but also could be other chronic conditions, and it actually support the empowerment of the patients to live more independently and with dignity their conditions, and also has a number of interesting numbers that have been, let's say, assessed in terms of cost saving, especially if we compare these with the the hospitalization or hospice care. Or coming closer to Estonia in Sweden, and here it comes Esther again, because Esther was a lady that had to explain 36 times to different services what was their problem, and they were always offering different solutions. And basically out of this, let's say, case, they developed a network that is strongly supported by ICT with a virtual competence center and based on integrated health and care record that actually provide support to 1/3 of the population in the region of in the Slamanska-Hongalandet regions, and also had a number of interesting results in terms of reduction of the admissions in hospital, for instance, or other unnecessary days, for instance, in hospital and so forth. And the most important, the satisfaction and let's say the capacity also of the elderly people to live more independently increased, and making also their conditions less limitation. And so, as I started, and I'm getting to the conclusion, we should ask ourselves what is best for Esther, so to have a more user and patient-centric approach, and that's where ICT can really play an important role. So what are the implications for what we call social policy innovations? Clearly, ICT-enabled social innovation can provide new approaches to dealing with growing societal challenges. And we've seen that the more successful initiatives actually are needs-driven, outcome-oriented, and they often generate open processes of co-creation and collaboration, and they actually improve communication between the different professionals in the care chain. At the same time, there is a considerable impact on the care systems and on the quality of work also of the care professionals, because integration that is facilitated by technology can lead to have new services that complement or even in some cases substitute, replace existing ones. And this actually re-engineering role of the ICTs can also reshape the relationships, the role, changing also the way public policy are designed and social services delivered, and thus inspiring what we like to call a possible sharing welfare model. And in fact, if we look at the future, and as I said, we haven't, let's say, there was no leak in the video from the Estonian presentation, but if we look at the future, not so distant, because in some countries already happening, we can see robotics will be there to provide personalized integrated care. Social robots are becoming more and more available. They can support, independent living, reducing costs, and of course improving, at least in theory, the work-life balance for informal care and families. And there are a number of technologies, especially artificial intelligence, that can help on that. Of course, there are a number of risks for misunderstanding, for instance, the human interaction relations, also possibility to actually increase rather than reduce the social isolation, and encouragement of violence, as it has been the case in some pilot projects. As you've seen, also the opinions are quite diverse, and so, but this is something that many governments are already considering, and from a research perspective, there is a lot of advances on this. But now, we are working at the moment on trying to see what could be the future of the welfare systems, and we have made some scenarios that are not yet published, but we are working on that and trying to see how austerity measures could, if we continue, for instance, bring into a certain future, how we could instead use technology and engaging the users in improving the services, and of course the issue of sustainability, that is not only in terms of financial sustainability, but also in terms of the, the more a more social cohesion in our communities, a more resilient society that we need to build. And of course, we are, as usual, trying to envision a positive, an ideal future that is what we call a collaborative nested welfare system, where there is an adaptive and extended model, not a mix of the Bismarckian Beveridge and kind of models we are now working on, and that could actually unlock this kind of sharing welfare paradigm we like to think about. I won't have time to go into this, as my time is ending now, but of course if we look at this and what could be the future of this scenario is clearly that the keywords are the collaboration, the peer support, and the co-management, the co-design, the co-production of solutions. And this here where, probably coming back to the main topic of this conference, that the transition from highly formalized procedures and institutionalized processes to more informal, community-based welfare production systems can be positive. And clearly there are a number of challenges, how to support, unleash, and control this potential paradigmatic shift in the welfare systems. Well, I'm sure the next speakers will give us some of the answers, because the key factors from our perspective are clearly the need to build a new social infrastructure, new delivery systems based on innovative intersectoral partnerships, but also new financial frameworks to support innovative business models and social impact investing. This could perhaps contribute to revamping the European project, strengthening its social dimension, and building on the 60 years of the European Social Fund and the EU, maybe helping us remembering and implementing the words of Robert Schuman, that Europe will be built through de facto solidarity and concrete generosity. And so President Juncker and all us should look at the founding father of the EU with these words in mind. So thank you. And if you want to know more, we have a number of publications on our website. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Fascinating developments you introduced. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for linking technology and independent living in the community. Indeed, the possibilities, the opportunities are huge, and I think that we should embrace these possibilities, these opportunities, because it will help us to make this shift from one system to another. We should not forget that there is also this digital divide, but maybe we can briefly discuss that during the Q&A session. The applause was standard. Let's ignore the applause directive and give an enthusiast applause to Mr. Gianluca. Our next speaker will introduce to us, discuss with us person-centered service design and how that can work in supporting people. Jerli Eivik, and I hope that the pronunciation is, let's say, for about 99% correct, is advisor of the Ministry of Social Affairs here in Estonia. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm really happy to see that despite very late dinner and all the wine that we offered, you are all still here. As mentioned, I work in the Estonian social ministry, so my presentation will be more on the practical side of the things, and I will be covering two topics. Firstly, Okay, I will be covering two topics. Firstly, why should we use the person-centered service design methods? And secondly, what we have learned in Estonia from our experiences in the social rehabilitation system service design. So to begin, what do these companies have in common? Uber, Amazon, Airbnb. In my opinion, these companies offer services that are easy to use, they are intuitive, and when they first came to the market, they often exceeded the expectations that the people had. And I think that more and more people actually expect the same things from the public services. But are these expectations actually met in welfare sector? When we think about the Estonian public services, then, for example, you can put in your tax application in a few seconds. But when we think about the welfare services, then we are far away from proactive services. So when we started off with, why do we actually have to challenge the services that we have from the person's standpoint? First of all, when we look at the system side of the things, the services are often side from the bureaucratic point of view. And this means that we have, for example, we have medical system, we have social sector, we have welfare, we have vocational services, but when we have actual people with actual needs, they might often need different services from different systems. And this is actually where the system falls apart. There is high likelihood that people will not get the help that they actually need because the systems are too complex. Okay, so when we were looking at the system, we figured out that there are two sort of problems in the Estonian system when we are looking at the rehabilitation services. First of all, how can we actually get the people to the right service at the right time? And secondly, how much duplication is there between services? Here I'm actually talking about social, medical and vocational rehabilitation. Okay. So how do we get to a more person-centered approach? First of all, we have to figure out what we need to do. And to figure that out, we need to map current services and identify the problems. Secondly, we have to figure out how to do it. And for that, we have to design new models. And this is actually the co-creation phase. So here, we need to gather all the target groups, experts from the field, and the people who actually know what is going on and what should be done. The third phase is improving the solutions that we have designed. And for that, I think the best solution is piloting these new solutions on a smaller group. And fourthly, we have to ask ourselves, should we scale throughout the state the services that we have designed? And if the answer to this question is yes, then we have to adjust the regulations and we have to adjust the practices. And just to explain a little bit what I am talking about. As I mentioned before, in Estonia we have three different lines of systems in rehabilitation systems. And this is actually a picture. If you look at the first dot, this is the person in need. And this is the journey that he or she has to go through. And you probably can't really see the colors, but those red dots on this picture are the places where people can actually fall off the wagon in a way, or the place where they can be left without the next service. Well, actually, the first time I put this picture together, I was thinking to myself that I have a master's degree in public administration, and it's complex for me. So what the hell is the person who actually gets to the system? What is he or she has to, what is she or she going to do? So what did we do to change this system? The first thing we asked ourselves is how can we simplify this picture? And for that, we went through a data analysis process. And in here, we wanted to address the second question, that was whether we are actually duplicating the services that we have in those different lines. And we thought that we are duplicating those services, but the actual data analysis showed that the duplication between those services is quite marginal. What the analysis actually showed was that the main problem is that people don't get to the next service that they need. So we were left with this one question. And this one question was, how can the people get to the right services at the right time? So what we did next was we took all those different target groups that we have in the rehabilitation system, and we categorized them into groups. So this is called, in service design, this is called creating personas. So instead of talking about statistics, we have, for example, Mari and Mart, who are 22 years old. They have some sort of diagnosis, they live somewhere, they have families, and they have those real personal applications to them. So the personas actually help us to get further from the statistics. What we did next, we tried to find those real people, and we carried out interviews with those people and also with their relatives and close ones and the service providers who are helping them. After the interviews, based on those interviews, we drew out the customer journeys, where we looked at all the steps that they had to go through in the experience of getting the services that they needed. After this, we organized the focus group working parties, and in there we had very different stakeholders. For example, disability unions, family members, service providers, financiers, people from the ministry, and so on. And in those focus group working parties, we looked at the customer journeys, and we tried to figure out whether those were just single cases, or were those cases actually representing the system. And I think we were lucky enough. Most of the interviews turned out to be representative. So based on those customer journeys, we built new models that would be more person-centered and that would actually help people to get to the services that they actually need. And after this, and the last phase is actually the ongoing phase, so I can't talk too much about the results yet. And the last phase is piloting these new models. These kind of maps were the ones that came out from the working party, the working groups, and we actually got more than 100 issues from this system that we had to address. Because we had more than 100 issues, we tried to identify those issues that are relatively easy to solve, but could be the game changers in this system. So we targeted 3 main problems. First, movement of data. This means that all the information does not get where it has to get to really help the person. Secondly, critical cases are not differentiated. This means that we don't really have the sort of emergency room system, which means that everyone goes to the same line and they get the service when it's their turn. And of course, as you all know, some people actually, some cases are more critical than the others. And thirdly, the accountability is unclear, meaning that quite often the person himself or herself is the main one responsible. And when you are in a very acute situation, you might not be able to really carry out accountability. These are some of the sample cases that we had in the service design process. We had situations from spinal cord injuries to substance abuse and depression. And I will talk a bit more about one case. These are sort of the customer journeys that we have, and these below there are the problems that we identified. In a way, these two interviews were my favorites, not because they were pretty, but just because they were very different and they highlighted the problem very clearly. So Kaarel and Kaie are both people who had their first psychotic episode of schizophrenia. And they both got their first psychosis in their teens, but they had very different journeys. Kaie was actually hospitalized 8 times before she got to the social side of the things. So she had a baby, she lost the custody of the baby, she was losing many of her jobs, and it took her literally 8 years to get the support that she needed. Kaarel was more lucky. He had a very enthusiastic psychiatric nurse who sort of took the accountability and helped him to the right system. So Kaarel got to the social side of the services straight away, straight from the hospital, and he didn't drop out of school. He kept his job, and right now he's coping rather well. So the question is it just the problem of Kaarel and Kaie? It's not. In Estonia, we have 13,000 people with schizophrenia, on average, of course. And each year, about 400 new people fall ill. And usually these are young people who are either in the working age or still in school. And for about 75% of those people, they actually have prognosis for recovery. For 25% of them, for the right intervention, the recovery is actually good. And for 50%, independent living is possible. And when we compare the cases of Kaarel and Kaie, the actual only difference was this one step, that someone would help him or her to the next service. And right now, when we have the responsibility to find support only on this person in this acute situation, it is quite likely that he or she will not get the help needed. So we saw this as a low-hanging fruit, and this was one of the first pilots that we addressed. And to tackle this issue, we are currently testing a model where Kaarel and Kaie are helped to the next level. So basically, the person is actively linked to the other services before he or she leaves the hospital after the first psychosis. There are no prerequisites to getting to the next service. So when the medical team sees that he or she needs the service, then he or she will get it. And those teams work together. And basically, we have no limitations in this pilot on what those people actually receive. So one of the interesting things that we found out during this pilot was that even when the person who is actually in the hospital is not ready to receive the help from the social sector, it might be that her or his family is ready to accept this support. So what we are doing is that even when the people are not ready to get the support that we are offering them proactively, then we still help the families. So what next? We actually have other pilots similar to this one that are being prepared. And after each pilot, the plan is to estimate whether the pilot has been successful or not, and then scale the results. Also, as I mentioned before, there were more than 100 challenges that we found during the design process. So we will keep on taking on the new challenges, and we will try to make our health and social and vocational systems more person-centric. And I hope we can all do it together, do it in all the countries, and make the services more person-centered. And here are my contacts. I am happy to work with all of you, and I hope we can make Europe better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good. Thank you very much, Jirli, for, well, actually I picked up 4 words from your presentation. Personalization, creativity, co-creation, and integration. And that is indeed the way forward, I think. Thank you very much for sharing this experience, this knowledge with us. Our next speaker is Director of the Investment Directorate of DG Employment, Adriana Sukova-Tosheva, is that more or less correct? Welcome. Thank you for joining us here. We could also say that, can I say Adriana, is that okay for you? We could also say that she is the money lady of DG Employment. And she will answer all possible questions you might have with regard to the future multi-financial framework. And she will also explore a bit with us how a financial framework can become a real enabler of what we are discussing here. You have the floor. Thank you very much. Sorry?
Adriana has been since the beginning of the AG group our greatest supporter.
Thank you.
And I have to say thanks to her, we managed to go so far.
Not a short, but a very enthusiastic applause, please.
Good morning, everybody. In fact, I asked to speak with a microphone in my hand because I'm coughing, so I want to be able to get the sight from the microphone when I cough. I'm sorry, I'm still recovering from a virus which lasted longer than expected. But look, put me on a very difficult place now, because if I'm able to give all the questions about the future, that's really something. But unfortunately, I can give partial answers for the moment. So, the title of that was proposed for this session or for my presentation, Financial Framework as Enabler, Future Prospects and what happens after EU funds. But I think that we have to put it after 2020, because we are now in the middle of the implementation of the current programming period. We know more or less where we are, we know what we have, what's programmed and how it's going on. But we are sure that there will be European funds post-2020, and definitely these funds will be more and more addressing the needs of people in the European Union. And the discussion on the future has already started. It's part of the broader debate about the future of Europe, of European 27 member states. And I would like to first identify some of the, key milestones that are putting us in a frame for the discussion for the future. First, in March, the Commission adopted a white paper on the future of Europe and launched a wide-ranging discussion on what future we want for us, for our citizens, for our children, and for Europe as a whole. So this reflection paper, there was a reflection paper on social dimension of Europe, which was published together with the initiative of a European Pillar of Social Rights, and I'm sure that most of you are very well familiar with that, because this Pillar of Social Rights will focus on the transformations that European societies and the world of work will undergo in the next decades. And also it identifies a number of options that we can collectively utilize and go for, so that we build a Europe which protects, empowers, and defends. End of March, the European Union celebrated the 60th anniversary of Europe, and there was a Rome Declaration of the European Union, So the Rome Declaration was adopted in Rome on the 25th of March, and it confirmed and outlined again the importance of a social Europe. So in a month from now in Göteborg, there will be a big event, the Social Summit for Fair Jobs and Growth, and there we expect that the proposal for the European Pillar of Social Rights be confirmed and also supported widely from heads of states, governments, parliament, and non-governmental sector. The discussion on the future, of course, has to take into account what are the limitations that we will definitely and inevitably be facing. One of these is the Brexit. And the exit of the UK from the European Union will have a substantial impact on the general budget available for European level action. The second one is the new priorities that are emerging now, and we cannot underestimate the need for more joint action and for more clear financial support for the areas of security, defense. And these are indeed things that we have to be taking into account for our future. They also give some challenges, but they also give some opportunities, and the discussion is now going on how to combine both. The President of the European Union is announcing or making a State of the Union speech every year, and this year in the State of the Union he confirmed again that the future of Europe is going inevitably and in a very important dimension through the European citizens and what Europe can do for them, and also he indicated as a first clear timeline for the discussion for the future multi-annual financial framework, the proposal of the Commission to be prepared by May 2018. So we have started a very intensive discussion now on how to prepare for the future and how to design best the priorities for the European level action. So the future of the funding, what are the key challenges that we have to consider? I underline that the social dimension of Europe is as high as never on the agenda of the discussion in Europe among European politicians, and investing in human capital is a crucial activity, a crucial measure, a crucial action for the European Union, so that we have an empowered people and also we have protected people. The purpose and the objective to empower people has been always the main core mission of the European Social Fund, and I think that what has been identified as challenges for the European Social Fund in the future have been already referred to by the two previous speakers. First, what would need the funding for? We think that the demographic challenge will be a very persistent and pertinent one. On the 9th of October, just a few days ago, the Commission published its seventh cohesion report, and it highlights that the economic recovery in Europe is now on an upward flow, and also regional disparities are shrinking. However, there are still GDP and unemployment levels that are below the levels before the crisis of 2008. So many young people, we know, still struggle to find a job. There have been a lot of initiatives in the current programming period, but obviously this will be a problem that needs a longer term solution and a longer term effort. The demographic challenge also is spelled in the one of the messages of Gianluca, that the number of people in Europe getting older is increasing, and the working age population is getting less. So currently, and the projection is that the working age population will decrease from 306 million to 269 million after 2020. So there are challenges for the whole society, and also there will be more challenges for the older working population. The female participation, and you know there are a lot of efforts to increase the female participation on the labor market, will not compensate for this trend and this loss of working population. So other groups that are not yet fully included in the labor market should be taken care of with more attention, so that we provide them with the proper access and also quality jobs. Our second priority our second challenge for the future, and what we need the funding for, is that we live in a world where technology is changing very fast. We have unexpected and never seen changes in our technological development, and also in our creativity development, in our productivity approaches, in the type of work we work and the type of occupations we have. So almost half of the existing professions, there is research showing that almost half of the existing professions now may be partly or entirely automated in the medium term, and low and medium skills will be not used at all. They'll be put at risk in the near future. The job losses are predicted to be mostly due to this phenomena, mostly in administration, manufacturing, management, agriculture. But there will be job gains, of course, in the field of science, engineering, health and care services that we are talking a lot today and yesterday probably, and logistics. We have, to that end, to work harder to upskill the workers, address the skills shortages, the skills mismatches which exist and which will be coming in the future, and also adapt our education and training systems to these needs. We need to fund for the solidarity and cohesion. And I'm glad for the last slide of Gianluca saying that it's already the founding father who put the principles of our joint future for Europe 60 years ago, that solidarity is an indispensable part of our work. The inequalities are increasing now, and they'll be probably persisting in the future, in spite of the overall improved situation. So we still have a challenge to try to tackle the social exclusion situations and improve the social inclusion for everyone in Europe. We also have a concern about the lower economic growth and the need to continue integrating more and more low-skilled people or upskilling them, but also people with low income into the labor market to make sure that they have the right means at their disposal to have a dignified life is one of the challenges and one of the main areas to explore. And I also think that here we have to think about, with more attention, to having adequate investment for independent living, giving equal opportunities to everyone, and also not excluding at the outset anybody from the possibilities that exist for everyone. And a last point, which is very important for having the possibility to support people and provide solidarity, is that we should continue with the reforms which make our societies and our economies resilient to change and external challenges. We need to continue with the structural reforms and also with the improvement of institutional capacity, because this has the first and most important impact on productivity, on sustainability, on competitiveness and growth. And the public administrations are one of the key elements in providing good quality services, and I'm very glad to learn about the experience of Estonia in this direction, focusing or refocusing the support through the personalized, personal tailor-made assistance, and also changing the approach towards the people in difficult situations and people in need. What is the future of funding? Now, our commissioner at the Cohesion Forum 3 weeks ago announced the directions of our thinking for the future about the European Social Fund. First, we think that there should not be a euro less for investment in human capital. And this is our starting point. We know that productivity, competitiveness are embedded in the skills and the qualifications of the workforce. So we need adequate level of funding so that all the challenges that human capital development would face will be properly addressed with enough amount of funding in the multi-annual financial framework. There are still too high levels of unemployment in Europe. There are long-term unemployed that are still substantial amounts and numbers. There is an objective for the social convergence, which has been outlined in the Pillar of Social Rights, and which we need to support and guide at EU level. Second, our financial support, we believe, should focus on three main strengths of investment. First, investing in people, and that will be our main and major concern. We need to invest in people to support their work life, their life throughout their birth to the end of their career and their retirement age. But also we need to provide support to people with difficulties, with special needs, and this is a part of the society which should not be never forgotten and left aside. We should support policy reforms because these reforms are the ones that create the framework for providing the support to people, and we will be doing that with providing incentives to member states to implement structural changes. And the third one is that we want to be sure that we still have available resources to experiment, to test new ideas and creative approaches. And I believe that such experimentations can help address the adverse, unexpected changes in situations that we face, but also develop innovative responses to social challenges and support social enterprises. And I think that social enterprises still have a big potential to grow and expand and provide the services that are mostly needed now. To support the EU policy objectives is one of the directions that we will more and more follow, that we have to ensure and deliver EU added value, that we have to invest in people in a very targeted way, with a very clear result and a very clear proof that if we don't invest, things will not change in the pace that we want them to change. So we want to go beyond the current allocation mechanisms where only the GDP is taken as a criteria, as an indicator for the allocation of the funding. We want to have a mixture of different indicators taking account of the social situations, also of the poverty levels in the member states, and avoiding the categorization of regions, because difficult situations happen also in big regions, in rich regions. And what will happen in the future, it's clear that we will simplify. We are working for not only simplifying the financial side of the implementation of the funds, using more simplified cost options, providing more standardized measures which have a real clear price tag, so that we have easier access to financing from the beneficiaries, we have less administrative burden, we have less controls, and we have less errors, of course, but also we want to have simple set of common rules for all the shared managed funds, and then a more broader fund-specific regulations where the specificities of each fund's mission are clearly developed and also reflect the needs of the beneficiaries and the participants to our interventions. There is a lot of work still to be done at member state level, because we know that there is a temptation, continuous temptation, to introduce additional rules which are not necessarily required by the EU funding, and it's a so-called gold plating. So this is slowing down the implementation and also delaying the achievement of the objectives and results that we required. We believe that we'll be able to ensure a more seamless transition from one period to another, and we are looking forward for member states taking all the efforts and speeding up the implementation. In 2018, we should be seeing now the full implementation of the operational programs, because sadly enough, currently, the European budget has made payments to the member states for interim payments for completed operations only at the level of 5%. And we're in the fourth year of implementation of this programming period, so I think there is some need to speed up and look again at the process internally. We will be thinking about simplifying also the programming, the monitoring, the reporting stages of our of our operational programs for the future, so that we really make access to funding easy and delivering to results. I think that I can conclude with a few words. First, our social goals are strongly affirmed by Article 3 of the Treaty of the European Union, and it's calling for strengthened cohesion, improved employment opportunities and living conditions. They were also echoed in the Rome Declaration that declares that taken individually, we would be sidelined by global dynamics. Standing together is our best chance to influence them and to defend our common interests and values. And we need strong people, and we need targeted investment in people in the future so that we meet our social goals, deliver principles of fairness, social protection and equal opportunities. And I'm ready to take any questions. Oh, I'm almost on time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's a bit stressful, yes.
Thank you very, very much for clarifying where we are with these rather complicated, difficult discussions, because indeed the Union is going through very difficult, challenging times. But as always, moments of crisis and deep reflections are also opportunities. So there are some opportunities there as well for us. Thank you very much. Blagodaria. And I also would like to thank Marianne for stressing again that indeed Andriana is very supportive when it comes to supporting also financially the work that we are doing here. Now I have a little request for Liz, so please allow me to have a little chat with her. Can I take some of your time? Thank you. Because indeed it's good to have a few questions maybe. I know that I'm in between you and your coffee break, but still, maybe we have a few interesting questions here. And I read out the first one. It's about ICT, and maybe the organizers can make sure that it appears on the large screens. ICT would allow better service profiling and tailoring to users' needs. However, we do not care of privacy. Okay. What about privacy issues with Facebook? And what if authorities attempt profiling? So the privacy issue and technology. I think that is maybe a question for you, Gianluca, and maybe for you as well, Gerli. Can you share your views on that with us? For you, I would like to elaborate a bit on the digital divide as well, because that's also a very important issue. Please, Gianluca.
Okay, well, this is, I mean, a 1 million euro question, because it's an important problem we are facing today. I mean, and there are colleagues in various DGs working on this, on the, talking about the digital platforms and their roles, etc. So, but in the specific field, I think this, well, in my opinion, in my personal opinion, this is no problem, in the sense that exactly what we do every day, we are going around with the smart phones, and all data about what we do are captured. I mean, of course, there's privacy by design, etc. But at the end, we are happy or satisfied with getting a service that we need, or helping us, giving us a bit of our privacy. So it's a trade-off. The same is, or should be, for more important services that are vital for certain people. And of course, it's no problem in the sense that there are technologies and methodologies to profiling without disclosing the privacy, the personal data. Data protection, of course, is an issue, can be an issue, but more and more there is a cyber war in act every day, in the sense that someone is trying to steal data, and the governments are still there to protect us. And I mean, in the State of the Union, President Juncker announced the creation of the Agency on Cybersecurity. security. So this is also a step forward in protecting us. But of course, we cannot, let's say, give up and just saying, okay, no, it's too dangerous, and avoiding to instead getting the huge benefits that sharing data can give us, especially in this very important field.
Okay. Your thoughts on this, Julie?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, I think. If I think about Estonia, I think we have rather big differences in the health sector and social sector again. Because in health sector, I think the data sharing is more advanced, but I think we are going there as well in the social sector. But I think the question is mainly about consent and the benefits that people can get from it. So, for example, in some cases, to really use predictive analytics and to be able to intervene early, I think we don't always have to have the personalized data. So I think it's something to really think about. I think this is something that we need to have discussions about, and I think that a lot of solutions can be in this ICT sector.
So actually what both of you say is it's important, but let's not make it a barrier to try to fully benefit from the new opportunities. Is my microphone still working? Yeah? Okay. It should not become a sort of a new barrier to fully benefit and use what is made available by new technologies. Okay, thank you very much. Digital divide.
Yeah, I mean, we're also linking to the other question, yes. Maybe, but
the other question is, because the audience can't see it, I think Uber, Amazon are such business models compatible with the human rights approach models we have in welfare services. Please. Okay,
digital divide. I mean, this is again, this is a very old issues, and actually there is not only the digital divide of the those who have and who don't have, the first order digital divide, but we should also look at the second or dynamic digital divide. We are all potentially subject to divides, and we see this with the new technology, etc. But again, this is something that shouldn't be a barrier. Definitely, it shouldn't be an issue, because I see with especially with many people think older people are not capable, are not willing to use technology. This is often not the case, and actually we should be worried by the excess of use of technology in a wrong way by some segment of the young population, or the digital natives, or the millennials. This is another issue. And then, the business models of the collaborative economy, that's something that, in my opinion, we should also look at closely, because on one side we should avoid a kind of Uberization of society, but on the other side we should also look at this as a potential disruptive radical change that we could have in, for the benefit of society. And definitely, why not having important services provided by other stakeholders in using the potential of the digital platforms.
Okay. Julie, you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I understand why the question is asked. There are, of course, privacy issues that are way more delicate in the public sector than they are in the private one. But I think when we are talking about communities and the resources that we have in there, then I think solutions in collaborative economy might be the ones that we have to turn to. And actually in Estonia we have a platform called Helpific. Maybe some of you heard about it in one of the workshops yesterday. And they are sort of trying it out already. They have put welfare services onto a collaborative platform, and I think this is the future. I think we just have to find the ways to tackle the privacy issues and get to the core of it.
Okay, thank you. And indeed, yesterday there was a very interesting workshop on ICT technology and so on, and how that can facilitate independent living and living in the community. And right after coffee, there will be a report of that workshop given by the moderator here on stage. Let's go and maybe look at a few questions with regard to finances. I have a sort of a first question, and I think that many of us are concerned about that. The financial framework might look completely different in the future, but will the ex-ante conditionality and the partnership principle, will these survive? Because they are for us very important. So maybe your thoughts on that first.
Well, in fact, it is because it's very linked to this question, because I was thinking about the ex-ante conditionalities when I read the question on the screen.
And then I will read it out, so that, can you bring the, it's not on the large screen yet. There is a high risk that the countries stop services after EU funding, how to monitor better the sustainability of measures and their continuation. It's the case that sometimes, thanks to EU money, ESF money, innovation is organized at local level, at regional level, but then when the EU funding stops, the projects stop as well, because it's not taken over by the funding that is made available at national or at regional level by municipalities or local authorities. So,
exactly, this is one of the reasons that in the current programming period we introduced the ex-ante conditionalities, because we wanted to be sure that there are the preconditions in place, be it strategic or administrative or legal, that the investment which the European funds will deliver will not be stopping after the stop of the funding. We will continue in the future with this link clearly, that what we are introducing with certain new policy measures or projects is mainstreamed in the national policies, and I think that's the biggest effort. On the partnership, I think that this was an ambition of the Commission which was even bigger than what we ended up with.
Okay.
But we have the Code of Conduct on Partnership, and I think that this is still fighting in some member states to be well placed, to be recognized widely and broadly as a very important way and mechanism of making sure that what is the European funding spent on is really meaningful, giving value added, but also understood well, taken ownership broadly and widely in the member state at different levels. I don't speak about national level only. So that the results that have been achieved with these projects are really used and followed and monitored better. I think that this will not step away. We will try to even strengthen the partnership in the future, because, as I said, for us, this is a crucial precondition for a success.
Okay. Thank you very much. You might have many other questions, but we all need a shot of caffeine now. We are a bit over time, so I suggest a short applause for our panel. Enjoy your coffee. We start again in, let's say, 25 minutes.
Okay, hello. Okay. Oh, we have a video. Hello, everybody. And we have a video now? Or? No, we don't. Wonderful. Okay. Well, we have 6 workshop moderators with us for this session. One is not with us. He was held back. So we still have the slide with the feedback from workshop 6. We have about 1 hour to get a flavor, I'd say, of the workshop contents, the key messages, what people had to say on the state of play, on inspiring practices, on challenges, on new approaches needed, possibly, and possibly also recommendations for the EU. So please, I also invite you, if you would like to use the workshop to send questions or feedback to complement this hour, and to you out there as well. Just to let you know, last night the moderators did a debrief with the conference rapporteur, Jan Jajab, who is, where is Jan? There you go. So he'll come and complement this after. So how are we going to do this? Who is going to go first? Workshop 1, that would be good. Yeah? So we have Annelie Habit, who's going to give us feedback.
Dear audience, it has been a pleasure to be a participant of the conference. And I ran the workshop yesterday with my dear colleague from Latvia, Gunta Anča, who had to leave yesterday's evening. But it was also a pleasure to work with her. We had 14 participants, and the subject of our workshop was user involvement. Our group was very diverse. We had people from public sector, from NGOs, users themselves from 6 different countries, and also from service providers, as well from the state and from the EU level. And we reached to the key findings. What it is, user involvement, how it is understood in different member states. We found that most of the member states, at least these where we had in the workshop, used the same model. The EU level and state level considers user as a umbrella organization, so they have a dialogues not with persons but with representatives. But on the local level, on the community, local municipality and service provider level, the user is meant as a person and with the family. How the user involvement can be meaningful? The first criteria we found was that if the user involvement has continuity and has outcomes. So if you, for example, assess person's need for services, then if in the end of the assessment you really can offer a choice or you really can offer these services, then it is meaningful to include the person. And also, we talked about continuity as well as in context of lifespan and different needs, that meaningful involvement is regular, not at once. Also, the involvement should be accessible and understandable for the person involved and for the organization involved. So, and they have to have capacity to be involved. Resources, time, people, knowledges, and accessible communication. And finally, we made some suggestion to EU that how EU could advocate user involvement in member states and also in EU level. And we had 2 messages to deliver to you today. First, the EU should focus on capacity building of NGOs, umbrella organization, not only the finances but also the trainings to empower them. And second, we found that EU should encourage member states to invest into user involvement, that EU may need a mechanism for encouraging states. That is shortly all.
Thank you very much for the flavor. You mentioned user involvement also means involving the families. Yeah?
Yeah,
what do you mean by that?
On the local level, on the service provider level, it means that, for example, if the person in need is a child or a person with an intellectual disability or with, for example, dementia, then the family is quite usually represents the needs. So, and the family is the first network for the person in need.
Okay, thank you very much for the clarification. Natasha, I guess that moves on smoothly to what you might have to say. So Natasha Kokic, I'll get it, Kokic, from the European Network.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks a lot for being here. I would like to thank everyone from our workshop yesterday that was preventing and its supportive solutions, including the role of families. We were a group of around more or less 10 people, very diverse. We had a very lively discussion, and we could have spent more time discussing, and we tried really to put all of our concerns, recommendations in several key points that you can see on the screen. But we discussed a bit the current situation and challenges and what to do, what to recommend. So we start from the point that we are talking about human rights here. And the basis is to protect a person and to promote human rights. And the current situation is actually not sustainable when families are providing assistance without support. And there are many challenges, like lack of strategic frameworks, so there is a lack of political will that needs to be strengthened. Often the role of families is not seen as a part of the DI, and personal assistance is a big issue. And there are risks or challenges in all life stages, let's say. So from the early childhood, there is a problem because the bond is interrupted between kids and parents, and the parents are not well informed, and they don't have correct information when it comes to professional advices. There is again another stage when kids start school. Parents again need support and correct information, advices, and then transition to adulthood. In all these stages, there is a need to support. There is also need to have a partnership, based approach among all stakeholders, and always keeping in mind what is important is interest of child, of a person. So based on our discussion on current state of play, on challenges, we summarized, let's say, 5 key messages that you can see. It's very important that there is a right to independent living and right to choose for people with support needs and their families. And we put for everyone, so not to discriminate anyone. So we can talk about children, adults, people with disabilities, really for everyone. And the approach needs to be personalized, individual, depending, analyzing what a person needs and it should be adapted to every situation. And family support should be seen as a measure both to prevent and to ensure independent living. And here we think about training, correct information, education from early stage, simplification of administrative procedures, and mainstream family support should be throughout EU policies, legislative and funding mechanisms. There is a need for data collection and monitoring measures. Here, when we mention EU funds, it's really important that EU funds are spent correctly, that there is no misuse of funds, so that there is a quality monitoring on how it is spent, and also to analyze where funds can be spent. For example, personal assistance is something where funds can be spent, and many countries really need, because personal assistance is not in place. Then there is a need to strengthen work-life balance measures and build community-based services, including personal assistance. And we say investing in families is actually investing in independent living. Very important in all stages, in everything what is done, is to include people who are concerned. They need to be part of discussions, of all processes, decisions, because they know what's the best. And the last point would be policy coordination, meaning a good coordination on all levels, between all policies. We put a list, but this is not the complete list, so it can be added, like employment, early childhood care, intervention, inclusive education, anti-poverty measures, social inclusion, health, economic aspects, social protection, and many more, because it can't be looked as a separate issue like support to families. And whatever the arrangement is, it's important that the key elements of personal assistance, for example, especially the ability to decide by whom, where, when, and how the service will be provided, are respected. And there is a need really to work with families, with extended families, with a really like a big, let's say, group of relatives. And just to conclude, families should enjoy to be families. Thank you for your attention.
Natasha. So families, okay, they need support, different types of support. The next workshop, is that you, Marco? Yeah, they need support, I guess, from their communities as well. Are communities ready, I wonder?
Okay.
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, I'd like to thank you, all workshop participants, for the contribution they gave to the discussion. It was very interesting for us to listen to our speaker experience, John Mayer, Jamie Bolling, and Paul Sekeresh. I'd like to share with you some key points emerged from our discussion. The first is prepare the community. For example, inclusive education, also for children, show the value of person, and fight stigmatization and fight fear. The second, chain of services around the person as a need. The third, focus on the person and individual plan for each person. For example, personalized path. And then foster activity involvement of the communities. Fifth, adequate national legislation and from users to active protagonists. To guarantee basic income and last, housing issues, for example, housing program and including transportation, a new way to think about spaces, for example, group home and co-housing. And final, adequate training for representative to support disability person. Thank you for attention.
Thank you very much, Marco. I think a lot of us here can identify with some of these messages. I'm wondering, Lisa, did any of this kind of stuff come up in your workshop and success stories, or?
Well, in terms of...
yeah, we...
Already?
If it didn't, then
okay.
You can go ahead and...
yes, we had... as one of the success stories that were covered in our workshop on age-friendly community initiatives. So a lot of what you just mentioned is important in terms of community involvement and housing, transportation, and participation in the community were covered with that. So shall I?
Please, absolutely.
Okay.
Tell us more.
So our workshop focused on the transition from institution-based care to community-based care, and on both the challenges in that transition process and some of the success factors. And we were lucky to have different lenses through our experience sharers on those questions regarding the different beneficiary groups. We had children, older persons, homeless persons, and people with disabilities covered. And what we did in the workshop was that we had, after the initial presentations, discussion groups looking at challenges and success factors through these different lenses. And I'd like to just summarize some of the common themes that emerged from those discussions, and to thank also all the participants for a very lively exchange yesterday. Following on from what you said, one of the key themes actually was about attitudes in the community, because when we think about the transition from institution-based to community-based services, we have to make sure not to stay within just the service provision, but to prepare the community for that interaction that is involved in, or that is the part and the key of community-based services. So some of the measures that were, or success factors there, were to enhance the contact and the interaction between the different groups we concerned and the community, to enhance social inclusion and fight stereotypes and stigma in the very different ways of the different groups have very different challenges that they faced with. Person-centered services, another theme that was discussed at length, in the sense that we have to be aware of the risks as we do the transition process of fragmented services or lack of communication between different types of service providers, to enhance coordination and integration. And user involvement is very important here, to make sure that the services that are created in the community do meet the needs of people concerned. And a key word here, I guess, would be choice. There's a need for a broad range of different services so that people really have a decision-making option between different offers according to their needs. The workforce, or the service providers, were a key theme in the discussions, as it is very important to build the capacity, change the thinking, educate and raise awareness of the new principles that would prevent an institutional culture that we criticize with institutions to be transported into the new service infrastructure we try to create. So assuming that in many cases it will be the same professionals that are transiting from the previous system to a new system, that is a very, very important part, to make sure that there's ownership for the principles of DI, and that the approach is human rights-based and concentrated on the person. We had some, of course, we asked everyone to think about what role the EU could play and what support is needed. And what really came up across the different groups and discussions was the need for learning from experience, that as we do this transition, there will be things that go wrong, there will be good examples, and instead of just learning about them in theory, what people need is to have experience sharing on the very concrete measures that others have already experimented with. So that means fostering exchange of good practices, of learning from bad practices as well, and fostering that peer learning, maybe at the level of professionals, of those really working on the front line. And also learning, or investing in research that really tackles some of the key challenges that are identified in the transition process, and learning again from an evidence base that could be fostered and collected. But also helping to think out of the box, maybe foster initiatives that experiment and that try to apply really innovative approaches to address some of those challenges, and give a space for that to flourish, and then from others to learn from it. So maybe in a nutshell, that were the key themes that we were discussing in the different groups. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Are we going to clap? Okay. Any reactions from the panelists? No? Zsolt? Can you relate to some of this, or?
Yes, and maybe I can continue because your last thoughts were about thinking out of the box, and I would like to upgrade it to say stepping out of the box. So even moving, doing something. We had a nice group of like 20, even 25, 27 people, and our workshop was a sort of journey to demonstrate that from traditional community-based services, how we can gradually move to new directions which are completely out of the current system. And we may consider how to embrace and make it part of the system. I don't want to spend too much time on the ICT services, because in the morning we had two great presentations in this topic, and I would just repeat. And in our workshop we had many aspects which we already heard in the morning. But I would like to have the opportunity to emphasize the second point of my short summary, more opportunities for self-determination, because this is something which is for me crucial when it comes to community-based services. Let me translate like this: what kind of identities we are providing to the people who are using our services. And when it comes to ICT solutions or entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, for me the biggest advantage and the promising future of these dimensions that it gives people completely new opportunities to build up a new identity or express themselves. When we talk about peer-to-peer solutions in the ICT field, it means people are meeting from a position which is very horizontal, and citizens are meeting with citizens. We don't really provide this in community-based services. When it comes to social entrepreneurship, people, instead of participating in vocational rehabilitation programs or sheltered workplaces, we are talking about entrepreneurs. Let me tell you an Estonian example. There is a great social enterprise in Estonia called Duo Kirjastus. They were established by people with mental health problems, and a couple of months ago we were together in Helsinki where they could introduce themselves. In spite of the fact that all of them are people with mental health problems, when they had to introduce themselves, the introduction sounded like this: my name is Fred, I am the SEO of Duo Kirjastus. Only the fifth, sixth sentence was referring to mental health. So they picked an identity, they created an identity for themselves where they could introduce themselves with a completely new, different identity, not necessarily connected to the welfare system. Is it a daycare center or any kind of traditional community-based service? Provide us the opportunity, provide the users the opportunity to introduce themselves as a person instead of a registered member of the service. I am a person who has to visit the dentist quite often in my life, which is my personal story. But I think I have a colorful personality with a lot of identities. I am a man, I am a father, I am a husband, I am a citizen, I am a fan of a football team, and whatever. Nobody ever called me and considered me that Zsolt is a person who is chronically dentally ill. I hope you understand my point. Mm-hmm. So our message was, when we think out of the box and step out of the box, we give opportunity for people who are today our users to be someone completely else, beyond psychiatry, beyond mental health, beyond social care. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Zsolt. Interesting stuff in there as well. Gosh, that must have been a fascinating workshop as well. Social entrepreneurship, yeah, I guess it's coming up. It's also linked to social policy innovation, social service innovation, and I guess, yeah, it links quite nicely to what we're seeing in the field of ICT. Jakob is not here to present that. We can still have the conclusions and messages, if possible. I mean, I'm not going to claim to feedback on a workshop where I wasn't there, but some of the messages emerging included the role of the European Union in terms of upscaling existing good examples, because there are a host of pilots happening currently in the European Union and where these are working, then clearly the European Union could have a role in upscaling. But there seems to be still a lack of real social entrepreneurship in relation to the role and potential of ICT in community-based services. So that was a clear message from the workshop as well. They looked at the role of ICT in different respects, in terms of personalization of services, in terms of broadening opportunities for staying at home, and also in terms of helping professionals operationalize their work more. They also had a more existential reflection, I think, on, if I understand correctly, you were all there, huh? When they fed back, is society ready for this? It was more of a broad reflection. And, well, I don't really know if we are. But I think it's interesting in a sense because we're clearly linking up with other fields, maybe more than before. So it ties in quite nicely with what you were saying about we need to think beyond the welfare field. And that ties quite nicely into, well, the labor market, which is pretty essential. But is the labor market of today the labor market of tomorrow? And yeah, do you want to give us some feedback? Please, Loris.
Absolutely, absolutely. This links very well to part of our workshop because we had a wider reflection on how employment leads to social inclusion, especially when the target groups are more difficult target groups, more far away from the labor market, more challenged to actually reach the labor market. We had a very interesting workshop, about 20 people, animated by my Estonian colleague Sirlis Sommer School, and I hope I don't do injustice with the pronunciation of the name, and 3 provocative presentations by Fintan Farrell of the Anti-Poverty Network, Laura Marchetti for the Mental Health Europe, and Karen Worsen from the Public Employment Service Network. Now, I think probably the first presentation was particularly challenging from a policy perspective, because obviously we need social inclusion. Employment is seen as the key lever for social inclusion. But I think one challenge ahead, which becomes a structural challenge, is in work poverty. This was highlighted in the presentation and also discussed by the group. If somebody who wants to use the employability opportunities to be socially included, yet he faces with a situation of in work poverty, it doesn't find, or she doesn't find, the right incentives to be socially included through work. This is obviously a challenge that was raised. I mean, there was also a discussion in the group with specific questions, so what's the solution? I must say that the group was not really conducive to final solutions, because if we go into this issue, the response is yes, we need to produce quality jobs. Yet, what are quality jobs? Now, OECD has a categorization of quality jobs, and this obviously goes into earning quality, security, skills, and work environments. And I think if we want to get serious about this, I mean, the response is not just one facet response. It has to be multifaceted. It has to go through the policy action. It has to go through the funding action. It has to go through some principles and change of mentalities actions. I mean, conclusion that I take from a European Commission perspective is to actually act on the pillar of social rights. I mean, a number of issues related to quality of jobs and in-work poverty, fighting in-work poverty are in the pillar of social rights. The pillar of social rights also builds on the recommendation for social inclusion of 2008, which obviously has this three-pronged approach of income support, adequate quality services, and inclusive labor market. markets. I mean, all of these link to each other. So basically, this is bread and butter of our future action, including supporting it through proper funding. We had the second presentation, which was also quite stimulating. It was, as I said, by Mental Health Europe, and this presentation focused especially on the role of employment support. And this is particularly important because, especially for the target group of the presentation, the mentally challenged persons, I think what seems to work on the ground is not just sheltered jobs or subsidized jobs. What seems to work on the ground is something that has an activation spin a bit more strongly pronounced, and especially what seems to work on the ground is jobs first and train later, which is sort of counterintuitive if you look at the sort of general theory of training first and job later. So it's something to provide opportunities first and accompany actively those opportunities with trainings on the job that actually create results in terms of sustainable output, so jobs that becomes more sustainable in the labor market. We also had a third presentation from the Public Employment Service Network, and this presentation focused on the key role of advanced planning. This presentation looked at we need to know better the clients, and we need to profile better the clients, we need to anticipate better what the clients actually need, because each client is an individual who carries very specific and particular needs. At the same time, we also need to know what the companies and employers expect, or at least prepare companies and employers for matching demand and supply. And this obviously requires partnership. It requires partnership not only between beneficiaries and employers, but including also social partners and multi-layer partnership, because it requires really an holistic approach. I think with this presentation we moved to the second part of the discussion, which was more like throwing some questions from the presentations or additional questions to the audience. Series animated a sort of vote. Each one of us obviously were coming from a specific country, and we were asked to rate our own countries from 1 to 5 according to how the countries were actually good in using employability as a pathway for social inclusion.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
The result was upsetting.
Okay.
Because the average
Care
was
to share
2.
the results?
So 1 being a minimum, 5 being very good. The result was 2. So the perception was very negative in terms of what countries are actually doing on the ground, which obviously calls for reinforced effort. How can we bring back the messages of this conference back to each other's countries, to each other's institutions, and actually do something for
good reality check.
Real implementation. There was also, a very good exchange of practices. For instance, one was quoted by Sweden, again getting back into the discussion of employment support for the case of refugees. And there basically the reasoning was sort of the reverse. You need language and education first, and then jobs. But sometimes it also works the other way around: job first and education and learning on the job. The issue of partnership came strongly from the discussion, and also the open discussion looked at the future of work and technologies, and this links also to Zsolt's presentation, to the workshop number 5 presentation. New technologies provide certainly an opportunity, because as universally we all work remotely, everybody universally can work remotely or can tailor the work according to their needs. But this is also creating some potential barriers. So technology has to be following universal design, accessibility principles. It should be an including factor rather than an excluding factors. Mm-hmm. Again, did we have the response yesterday in the workshop? No.
but you're putting it out there as a challenge.
For the future. And finally, I cannot not mention the last challenge, which is the use of funds.
Please do.
European funds are very helpful. A lot of projects have shown it during the conference. A lot of people have stated that during the different interventions. But Andriana, this is not new to our ears. They are complex to be used. There's a lot of simplification to be made, especially if we talk about final beneficiaries, NGOs, small NGOs that have to actually use those funds, and see in the current regulatory framework more of a barrier than an opportunity. And I conclude with this.
Thank you very much, Loris. Yeah, the funds. I got feedback during the coffee break in relation to the European Social Fund. Aside from the complexities of take-up and use of the funds, which I don't think is a major barrier. Once you know the system, I think it can be very useful. I think there were some issues of sustainability. So the funds can be useful to pilot innovation, by all means, but it has to be upscaled and mainstreamed into the actual welfare systems existing in the countries. Otherwise, I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot here, no? I don't know, it's just my own personal reflection based on the chat I had with Maureen from Inclusion Europe. Charlotte, you said something interesting yesterday. Do you want to share that with us? The future of work, the changing landscape. Is it about work or about income? Or?
I tend to say it's more about income, just because what we call today work and job, what we call today labor market, I'm not sure will exist in 15 years. And we need to adjust ourselves to new terms, and if we approach it from the perspective of income, so somehow we have to survive, right? We need resources, we need to redistribute existing resources or distribute existing resources. The terms we are using today most likely won't work in the future. And that's why I am a bit worried when in the welfare system I don't see that how we prepare ourselves for that. There is a good scenario. If work won't be so obvious, I mean so default, then those people who today we consider unable to work or incapable to work won't be so outstanding, so problematic in a way, because many people will be in this planet who don't have a job and have income in another way. So it can be a completely new context, because the public image of work will completely change. And what you already mentioned, if we can all work remotely, ICT technology enables the entry point for entrepreneurship, and by entrepreneurship not necessarily we mean establishing a factory, but doing something which generates income. It will be much easier, spite of disability, spite of distances, spite of life situations, spite of age, then this is again creating new opportunities. I have no idea. I'm lecturing at a university, and nowadays at universities we say that we a little bit lie, every university which promises young people that we know that what will happen in 4 years, and we prepare you for something, a profession, because we know what you have to do, and it prepares for the future. It's not true anymore. But it's also like this when what we say to someone who is a disabled person and now is like 5 years old, what will be his or her life when she will be or he will be 18, 22? And I have no idea. I have no idea.
Thanks a lot for the reflection. I don't know if you want to come in on some of what was said in the workshops or complement, or I have this interesting comment. Could you put it up, please? I'm really not sure what to do with that. Please do. Could someone somebody give Mario a mic, please? Thank you so much, Scholt. I think someone inspired by music, clearly.
Yeah, we started this conference with very extraordinary openness, and at the end of our workshop, and this morning, I started to think that we should also wrap up this conference in a mood or in a rhythm of the band Pandemonium, and so we made a little brainstorming and thought that those 4 key messages which came out from our workshop, there must be some rock punk songs to address them. That if you hear them from radio or Google them YouTube, then if you hear them, you will think about it. You will think about Attitudes, very provocative song by Sepultura. You will think about person-centered services. You don't have to stay in academic way of talking about it, but just put the song on, watch that video, and you get the point. And also capacity building. Again, maybe we get too academic about it, but if you listen to that song, Phil Farrell, Happy, you feel that positive emotion, because if we talk about service providers and raising their knowledge and raising the knowledge of social workers, future employers of disabled people in society, it should be motivated by a positive emotion that we all are people, we all are equal, so let's work together. And then sharing best practices. Again, let's not just come together, have trips to each other countries, but let's listen to that song, come to me, be more open, be more active, ask people to come with you. Let's not wait for another conference, but let's meet. In the meanwhile, let's be active. And finally, just get out of the box, or walk out of the box, or work out of the box. And then we thought that Queen might be a good message. So next time when you see this train pushing through that wall, think about it. What have you done differently today? And what you're going to do tomorrow? So that's our playlist.
Thank you for elaborating that. No pressure, other workshops. Would anyone else like to comment? You know what? You can go digital if you want. Do we have other questions? Or is that Maureen? Could somebody give Maureen from Inclusion Europe the mic? A mic? Could I add to that playlist? Am I allowed to? I think I've been listening to this song by the band Gossip called Moving in the Right Direction. Do you know it? It's a good one. You should look it up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maureen.
Liz has already introduced me. Just listening to all the feedback and lots to think about and lots, hopefully, to act on. But one thing seemed to be missing for me, and that was the theme of empowerment. Mm-hmm. So user involvement kind of touched on it, but didn't really get there. We talk about deinstitutionalisation, and we're trying to build some momentum to make that happen. To whom is anybody accountable for deinstitutionalisation? And what actions can the EU support to empower people with disabilities, the other groups that we're concerned about, children, young people, homeless people, to actually demand deinstitutionalisation and hold the authorities to account for the grand strategies that they develop? Back home in Northern Ireland, we had self-advocacy developing in one of our long-stay hospitals. And those people were writing to the minister and saying, you said in this policy document that nobody would be living in hospital by 2002. It's now 2015. Who's to be held to account for that? So I think we need some actions that are empowering people and building both an infrastructure and processes to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much for making that point. I'm pretty sure it came up in the workshop, and we're not doing each workshop justice, I think, with the short feedback, but thank you for making that point, Maureen. Do you want to react to that? Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for bringing this out. We indeed discussed empowerment and we used both terms, capacity building and empowerment of the users. And we even had some good examples from the service providers in Estonia. The one good example, I think it suits here. Can I bring it out?
Please do.
The little village of Palamuse in Estonia had a case of a person with mental health problem, how to include into the community after the deinstitutionalization. And it was a happy case.
In Estonia? Or?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, in Estonia. Don't you know Palamuse village?
No.
Yeah.
The geography, I was never great.
You have to read our classical youth roman named Spring.
Oh, very nice.
What did they do? It was an initiative of NGO, and they made a network of this person needed help, and the local community and the local municipality. They had so-called roundtables or conversation in the youth center because this person got bullied in the community, and that was the problem. Okay. And they got help from the municipality. The social worker was in the network, and the problem was solved. But it needed initiative from the NGO and several parts in this network. So it took time and resources, but it had a good result.
Okay.
So there are some examples, and we consider it very important.
Okay, thank you for that contribution. I have a question here, if you can put it up on the screen. This time we're shifting. Wow, it's a mix. That's the fantastic thing about this conference. It's bringing funding and policy together. It's kind of encompassed, I think, in this question. EU policy and funds should continue to be agnostic of grouping, so that DI policy and funds are balanced and all groups move forward together towards the progressive realization of human rights. I wonder who wrote that. I think I know. I think that's a fair point. I don't know if that came up because the workshops covered many, many different areas and topics which are highly relevant to DI, and that will be the job of Jan after, to bring that all together into a conference conclusion. But here, I don't know if there are any reactions from the panel in terms of this idea of, yeah, please, Natasha, go for it. There you go.
It was actually part of our workshop, but it's something I wouldn't miss to comment because it's like one of the main parts of work of INIL, this European Network on Independent Living, where we really look into how the funds are used for the transition from institutional to community-based care within our campaign. And we are quite concerned, you know, because from the past, there are evidences that funds were used actually to encourage institutional care. So we are really looking how to prevent that funds are used for institutional care and how to monitor better, how to prevent that so that it doesn't happen, so the money is not wasted, but that money is really invested for the DI. And now we are still concerned because there are countries that are giving some examples that we need to check. So we are worried if this institutional culture still continues to be funded from the structural funds. And it is possible to prevent that, really. So.
Thank you very much for the clarification. I guess it was raised a little throughout the conference as well, preparing for the future budget, MFF they call it in Brussels. And I guess the importance of ensuring DI stays on the agenda of the European Structural and Investment Funds through what they call an ex-ante conditionality. So the conditionality for spending the funds is to have a clear DI strategy in place, amongst other things. So I guess we have to think of that for the future, which is now, in fact, and see how we can build in DI, mainstream DI concerns. And we're going to have to reflect, I guess, on this idea of groups or agnostic of groups and how to ensure sustainable, funding for DI in the post-2020 budget of the European Union. I have, Marianne, yes, please come in. Because I have just not even a question, but just the longest statement ever on the screen here. Is that you, Marianne?
I just wanted to say that, one of the issues that we had to provide evidence on now for the new funds is the added value of the EU funding in what we are doing. And I think the DI process, it's one of the success stories that we have, because through funding, we managed to do policy reforms and to establish, a strategy at the level of the member states in order to go forward. So for me, it is one of the areas where we did this, and also at the same time social innovation, because what we are doing, it's a new way of delivering services. So I think that, at least as far as I'm concerned, we could let's say, we can argue for DI being part of the next funding.
Absolutely. Try and stop us. Schultz and then Natasha. You can come in, absolutely. Comment on that.
I completely agree. Sorry, the switch on it. Yes. Yeah. I completely agree. I also see the progress. Still, it's maybe just me. I am not happy with the speed. So somehow, and from my perspective, I always have the impression that the European Commission is too polite. And in Hungary, in my home country, if a rich man enters a pub and there is a music group, the man pays the group, the whole night only the songs will be there, which is ordered by the person who paid. This is the rule. And if DI would financed by private investors, not public money, I don't think they would let to last it for so long and so, I acknowledge the progress. It's completely different than it was even 10 years ago or 15 years ago. But I know faster changes. So this is just my personal point that, in my opinion, the way we use this money is too loosened, too free, is a question of.
Do you know the word Luke was using yesterday is patchy?
Yeah. Okay, that's
patchy.
Perfect.
It's slow. It's patchy. Yes. Natasha, do you want to come in on that?
I'll just say quickly. Also, our concern is there are some member states that are not using ESF for the transition from institutional to community-based care. So I look at you. Can you encourage them to use? Example, there are several examples.
Strongly encourage them.
Yes,
Loris,
strongly.
It's your cue.
I don't think I will have a solution, but I have a lot of inputs from the reflection. Why I don't have the solution is that we always struggle to have a targeted approach versus a mainstreamed approach. And we have a lot of evidence that actually shows that probably continuing to be agnostic on a number of target groups reveals to be more prone to positive outputs than having targeted approaches, because once you have two targeted approaches, then the risk is also that you put people in silos which will never communicate with mainstreamed labor market or social inclusion strands. Nonetheless, the problem remains. So how do we ensure focus? How do we ensure that certain things are delivered and delivered on time and not in the next 50 years, as Scholt was arguing? I think probably there we have a lot of push also from the A-level group on simplification that really looked at this issue of budget for results. So how can we turn funding into something that is more focused on results, less on the processes per se of funding, less on accountancy of funding, but rather on results and on the sustainability of these results. And I think the sort of battleground or maybe future cooperation that we really need to harness to devise the new regulatory frameworks is really on this challenge. So how do we make it happen in terms of results, make it happen faster, and in a lighter way from a bureaucracy perspective for the final beneficiaries?
Thank you very much for that response. Luke, do you want to come in on some of what's been said? No? No. The person who sent that ridiculously long question will comment. Would you like to comment? Miriana, please. You have the floor.
You see, I was behaving, trying to go digital, but I see that analog
really
comments are also welcome. So, I'm Miriana Giraldi from SOS Children's Villages International, and really I was just trying to make the point about the discussion we were having yesterday in the workshop on prevention. For example, when we look at children, that really investing in preventative services is very important. So removing whenever possible the need for alternative care in the first place. For example, by delivering a range of services, whether to support the child because the child has special needs, or families, parents, because of various social problems that the family may go through. So really making a plea for prevention and investing in a range of integrated services to support them.
Thank you very much for the clarification, Marianne. Are there any comments, additional comments from Adriana, please come in. Could you give, yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. In fact, during the break, I found out that one of our programs that we do have in DG Employment and Social Innovation Program, is not one that's known to many people. And there, currently, we do have calls for proposals under social innovation. And these calls are published regularly, and we are trying to support projects where social innovation is developed, creativity is kind of coming up, and through these projects, the ones that are successful, we want to mainstream the experience in the ESF. We had a first joint meeting of the ESF committee and the EASI program committee in February, because there are already experiences in some of the projects that have been completed, which can be useful for the ESF managing authorities. And we'll have another one next year, of course, because we want to make sure that I am quite surprised that the EASY program, which is directly managed by the Commission, we have also contact points in all member states whom we invite in the EASY committee every 3 times a year, that this program is not familiar to the people. And I believe there is something on our side as well to be done to promote more what we have. And when I mentioned in the presentation for the future, this is our idea of having this, still keep the possibility of testing, innovation, experimentation with directly managed funds, so that we have a closer look of the implementation of the projects and then be able to use the results of these projects. I agree that there is a lot of criticism to be addressed not only to the Commission but also to the Member States for the management of the funds, for the complexity and so on. I mentioned the gold plating. We are trying to simplify. We are referring to the simplification, to the high-level group on simplification, and we want to be sure that indeed our value added is, as Marianne said, is a proven one. We have to show better the results that has been achieved, and I know there are very successful examples of deinstitutionalization already happening in the last few years. There are challenges in other member states still to be addressed, but I believe with common efforts we'll manage. I like these comments on taking children support through family support. And I have personal kind of knowledge about a project which is run in my home country by a non-governmental organization. It's a long story, but it works with parents when a child is not wanted to be taken home. And that's the family parents conferences that they organize, which is a model I know taken from the Netherlands. But this is one of the very direct, relevant support provided to families in a small circle, getting the extended family together to make sure that this child which needs special care is grown in a home environment. It's not left in an institution or trying to find a way of other way of taking care of the child. So there are interesting models in Europe which can be disseminated widely, and I believe that conferences like this could be used. We have also the social convention, regular meetings, and a lot of aspects that we have to take care of for the social inclusion globally in Europe. But I think that sharing experiences is really the best way to widely apply what has been tested already. So I can talk long. I'm really difficult to stop.
Thank you very much, Anjana. I think the message of family carers, family supporters being essential, but also needing support, that came out absolutely. And in fact, my own organization, Coffee Families Europe, launched a consultation of family carers in May this year. We had more than 1,000 responses across 16 countries, and we'll be presenting the results of that in the European Parliament on the 30th of November, in case you're interested on the needs of family carers, in fact. So thank you for that. In relation to social innovation, I want to come back because clearly there's huge potential, but it somehow detracts from attention from the essential, in a sense, which is the UNCRPD, the UNCRC, the human rights treaties, which in fact are driving this process and should be the drivers. And the social innovation, the ESF, are extremely complementary and can be important, drivers. But I think we have to, we have to find a balance between using the full potential of these programs while, driving the implementation of human rights. I have Helga who would like to come in, and then we wrap up with you if you like. Yeah, Helga, please, you have the floor. Can somebody, thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I wanted to make two small comments. One about the European Structural Fund. I know there's a lot of organizations for persons with disabilities that have applied for a fund. I used to work for the European Union of the Deaf myself, so I have a lot of experience with this, and I know that there's a lot of competition in getting these funds, which is good, because you want to make sure that good quality projects are being funded. But there's one element that puts persons and organizations for people with disabilities at a disadvantage. Often these organizations require personal assistance, or for example, myself, for deaf people, they need communication services so they can communicate with other people about the projects, which is an added cost. And this is considered part of the budget. Now, when you look at that, it then brings the cost of the entire budget very high, and when you're competing with other projects, you often lose the bid for the funds. So I think what needs to happen is you have a budget for your project, and then a separate piece that talks about the personal assistance, right? So the project should be judged based on the ideas of the project, the plan that they've laid out, and the milestones and goals that they have in its own right, and should be assessed on whatever those criteria are. The selection should then be made, which projects want to be funded, and then the second phase would then be looking at added costs, so things like services for persons with disabilities. I I think that this would be a much more equitable selection process compared to what the system is now, because often organizations for persons with disabilities don't even have an opportunity to acquire these funds because they have to build in the cost for these services within the main project, and so they're put at a disadvantage. So that's something for the Commission to consider. The second thing, now I heard that there were some member states that are not participating or who are not using the ESF availability. So I'm just wondering here if one of the possible reasons, let me give you an example. I'm a city council member in Ghent, where I live. And I remember, or when I remember at the time, there was a situation with the Roma population. So Romania and Bulgaria and several other countries, well, there was a project that specifically focused on the Roma population, but these other countries didn't apply to be a part of this project or for the funds because they couldn't afford to co-fund it. So for that example that I'm talking about, the co-funding level for the Roma population, I think, was only 20%. And these other countries couldn't even afford that minimal amount of co-funding.
Yeah.
Or maybe it wasn't a priority for them. I mean, just to say, and I don't want to judge. But I also wanted to throw that out there as another consideration, that we need to find ways to encourage these particular countries to apply for ESF monies. Perhaps this co-funding requirement is cost prohibitive for some of these countries to be able to participate. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Helga, for the feedback. I think we can all relate to the technicalities of meeting the funds, whether it's 20% or 50%. Duly noted. Thank you, Helga. Would anyone else like to give a final comment? If not, Adriana? Yeah, okay, final comment, and then we wrap up and we move to the final session to hear Jan Jacob.
Thank you very much. In fact, my comment is also about what was just said by Ms. Stevens. Co-financing at project level is a national decision.
Sure.
So, let's be clear. Don't blame the Commission again.
Oh, but I don't think they were blaming anyone. It's just a reality.
Yeah, there are different considerations for sure.
Of course.
The thing for me is that we were talking a lot about partnership, and that's a key. Mm-hmm. There is a need for pressure from all sides so that we get to an agreeable or well-established situation. I want to give it as an example the high ambition of the Commission for applying the UN Charters of fundamental rights, for people with disabilities and so on in the in the Common Provision Regulation. And there was a lot of, how to say, reluctance on behalf of the Council mostly to take responsibility for that.
Interesting.
And we were talking before we start this morning and at the break that it is difficult for people with disabilities to move freely. We're talking about accessibility, simple physical accessibility to public spaces. And we wanted this to be a precondition for any investment. So it's slightly amended and it can
negotiation, I can imagine.
Exactly, but it can be still overcome with the current, with the current situation. We know that. Anyway, we were very straightforward in our demand. So this pressure should not be stopped.
Absolutely.
We should continue pushing for this because more and more people need, in different situations, access to different public institutions or to services and so on.
Thank you very much.
And okay, I'll stop here, of course.
I'm sorry, I have to because
I can tell you stories.
If I could go on for hours, honestly. But thank you very much, Adriana. Let's continue, absolutely, after, beyond this conference. I would just like to thank the moderators. Natasha had to nip out to get a flight, but thank you very, very much for this effort, and thank you very much for your participation. So, are we going to do the big clap, or? Go on. Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
And thank you, panelists. Again, I think it became clear, thanks to the reports of the moderators and the workshop leaders, that there is as much knowledge and know-how in the room as what we were able to bring on stage. It is clear that there is a wealth of knowledge and know-how in this room, and I hope that during breaks and yesterday evening and in the workshops you could share this knowledge and know-how and learn from one another. I'm also pretty sure that you want to break free from this conference at this point now. So let's try to organize that in a correct way. We need to bring on stage, I think, the podium. Can maybe the technical staff do that? Okay, they will do that. Perfect. In the meantime, I would like to turn to Cathy. Cathy is our rapporteur who tried to grasp the messages of this conference in a slightly different way than we are used to see them. Jan will in a minute bring the more elaborated conclusions of this conference, but sometimes bringing conclusions and ideas, elements in a more visual type of way, format, that can be very, very enlightening and enriching. How did it go? Cathy.
Hello, everybody. Is it working? Yeah. Hello, everybody. It's nice to talk a bit as well, because I need to be quiet and listen all the time. So it was very interesting, and I'd like to share this story that yesterday one lady came to me and said that, oh, it must be very hard for you that you are out of the field.
You're not visible, so we have to move in this direction.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I was trying to avoid to come to the stage. Okay.
You can't escape from the camera.
So that I'm out of the field, but actually it's not true, because 4 years ago I was a youth worker, and you know the youth workers are very much tied with the subject that you had 2 days here. So today I'm visual thinker, and all of you can be actually visual thinkers. You can make notes like this. And I was working with my limiting beliefs, because 4 years ago I thought I can't draw. And what I heard here for these 2 days, it's you can give money and make a policy and everything, but it's working with people a lot, working with their limiting beliefs, but everything is possible.
Yeah, yeah. Just one question. Yes, please, yes. If you have to take out 2 or 3, apart from what you just said, 2 or 3 other key messages, what did you pick up as main elements, maybe for the future?
Yeah, I draw mostly a hand. That means a lot like a human touch, being personal, and I draw a brain, which means making a change in thinking. And yeah, I think there's a lot of money issue as well, but I would like to point out those 2.
Okay, thank you. What will happen with this material? It would be a shame not to further use it, no? What will happen with your drawings, with your work?
I will digitalize them, and you will have them later by emails probably. But our Ministry of Social Affairs will put the paper copies to their walls, as I heard. Yeah.
During the council meeting, I thought, no? Is that correct, right? We'll see.
We will see.
We'll see. Please give Cathy a very, very warm applause. Thank you. After the official opening yesterday morning shared by Liz, Professor Quinn opened the conference, and Professor Quinn is since many years the person who stimulates the debate around deinstitutionalisation. He always pushes us, the academic world, the politicians, to do the right thing. A second person is very important for the things we discussed over the last 2 days, and that is, as I already introduced him yesterday, Mr. Jan Jarab. Mr. Jan Jarab, who is indeed representative of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Mexico now. Before that, he had that position in Brussels, and before that, he started, in fact, the EEG, the European Expert Group on deinstitutionalization and the promotion of community-based services. Jan, I know that it was very difficult and challenging for you to not only travel from Mexico to Tallinn, but also to make the mind shift from Mexico to Europe again. Still, I think that you are the best possible person to bring this conference to a close with some very clear and strong, I'm sure, conclusions and recommendations. Please feel free to go to the podium. Please.
All good? It's a fixed one. That's better. Good afternoon. Well, Luc Zelderlo has put me in a very difficult position because he has raised completely unrealistic expectations. To summarize such a rich conference like this one is almost as difficult as what the Monty Pythons tried to do in their famous or infamous summarizing Proust, summarizing Marcel Proust's À la recherche de temps perdu, which of course is a very funny sketch, and they tried to summarize it in a way that the author would not recognize. Now, I do hope that you will recognize yourselves in those little bits that will be the little fragments of each of your contributions, but if some of them gets forgotten, then well, it is because of the time frame that was given to me, which is 15 minutes to summarize such a great body of work. And I wanted to thank the organizers for bringing me over from Mexico. It's a really kind of a strange feeling to enter a past life for 2 days and then just be sent back. And it's true that nowadays we people from Mexico don't get all that many opportunities, so perhaps, you know, it's kind of you to invite someone from Mexico. It is all about dignity and independent living. It is about moving towards a policy that favors personalization of services, that favors self-determination and the role of a social being. And as many of you have said, we need to start with the basics. We need to start with the legal basis. And the firmest legal basis we have nowadays is in the area of rights of persons with disabilities, the legal basis in terms of human rights, with the Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities being the only instrument that's ratified both by the member states and by the EU. And that surely calls for synergies between both in its implementation. And Article 19, the article on independent living and inclusion in the community, is, as Gerard Quinn has often said, a key article. It's an article that is key to the enjoyment of a number of other rights enshrined in the Convention, and indeed it embodies the innovative spirit, the paradigm shift that is represented by the Convention. And we are saying this at a very interesting moment in history, because after a long and deliberate effort, we now have from the committee a more specific guidance the new general comment on Article 19. And I would really encourage the European Commission, because the European Union has ratified the treaty, to look very much at this general comment as an additional argument, as a very strong additional argument for promoting deinstitutionalization, for promoting independent living and inclusion in the community. The second premise which we heard, I have three premises and I come to risks and recommendations. The second premise which we heard is that although we have the more solid legal basis in terms of human rights of persons with disabilities, we shouldn't limit ourselves to that group of rights holders, that we need life course policies, we need an intersectionality perspective. And the justification can well be that even the Convention itself, and even its famous Article 19, they don't really describe new rights. They highlight that right for persons with disabilities because it was so often denied to them. But it is a right that everyone has. So we can actually use it as guidance for policies across other categories of rights holders: children, older persons, homeless persons, and so forth. Children were perhaps not enough mentioned in this conference, and several participants came up to me in the breaks and said, do something about it. Well, I'm supposed to summarize. So the only thing that really wasn't that much mentioned, I would mention here at least as another tool, and that is these are the UN guidelines on the alternative care of children from 2009. These are not a convention, but they are a tool to interpret a convention, and namely the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And they also provide relevant guidance. For instance, they say very clearly that poverty should not be a reason to separate children from their families. And when there is a reason to separate children from their biological families, such as abuse, then the alternative services that should be preferred are services of a family type, not institutions. It actually says that where large-scale institutions do exist, there should be programs for deinstitutionalization. The third premise, and here I'm being cheeky, I know. I mean, it could be a conclusion, but I take it as a premise. I hope we can agree on it, that the whole issue is not primarily an economic issue. It is about society's values. Of course, we can have endless debates on the economy, and we'll no doubt have endless debates on the economy, where what is more advantages in the short run, middle run, long run. There's an emerging consensus, I would say, that investing in inclusion is probably going to save money in the long run, probably cost some money in the short run, but the economic argument, and we heard it very clearly here, is not the right one. Very often, simply, what is cheaper will be less good care in whichever category. The economic argument has to be seen as secondary, because the primary argument is an ethical one, a moral one, and a legal one. The legal one we heard already, but the moral argument is that is simply wrong to remove persons with disabilities from the community, and the same goes for older persons or for vulnerable groups of children. It is right for them to be in the community, and when we remove them from that community, it is a loss for them, and it is also a loss for the community itself. Then we spoke about risks. there were several. I've tried to group them into 3 groups. The risk of the first type is to close down institutions without creating robust services to replace them. And as a footnote to that risk, we have, let's say, a communication risk, which is not communicating quite well what you intend to do, so that families and users do get afraid that this would happen, that they would get abandoned. And of course, they should not be abandoned, and the policy should not consist in dumping the responsibility back on families. It isn't about returning to some kind of imaginary, idealized past when families took all the care on themselves, both because that past in that form never really existed. We know that the past was full of stigma against persons with disabilities, both for a very real gender dimension of it. I mean, in that past, pre-modern past, it was basically sacrificing the women to take care, but also because we are not looking to recreate the past. We're looking towards the future, towards developing personalized 21st century level support services to follow the needs and the choices of users. And we do need to learn from mistakes that were made in some of the previous deinstitutionalization processes. There are good examples, there are less good examples, there are some worrying examples, and very often we see that states first do it wrong and then only then do it right. And so that they do not create enough and high-quality services, that they underestimate the need for those, or that the economic logic that I mentioned earlier becomes the main logic why deinstitutionalization goes forward. And that isn't a good logic, because, of course, if some policymakers want to close institutions mainly to save money, then they'll be saving money also on the services that are to replace it, and there'll be a lack of services. So that is to be avoided. We heard something about that in the narrative of Canada, which then went in the good way, but of course made some of these mistakes in the first stage. And it's not only a Canadian narrative, we have seen it in some of the other countries. The second risk, and that was very prominent, I would almost say, is the dominant risk in the landscape of the European funds, is that they could be used to finance reforms which in fact perpetuate the old model on a smaller scale. It's a kind of a strange situation, because it may appear that on the rhetoric level the reformers have won, and on the practical level the defenders of the establishment very often run away with the money. And how do they do it? Well, there is a very powerful conservative care industry with very strong directors and professors and experts who are very good at explaining to government officials that they need to keep the control, that you can change the appearance of the system. You can go from big institutions to small ones, to small nice houses, but they have to keep in control because they know better. They know better than everybody else, because everybody else is either a layman or a user. I mean, so, and we need to really challenge this. We need to be very careful that this doesn't happen, that it doesn't result, this whole energy, into money being again spent on bricks and mortar, investing into new, smaller buildings, rather than into new person-centered services. And of course, this all happens in a situation where we have to have some sympathy for the management authorities, because they are indeed often under pressure to show that they are spending rather than to show how they are spending. And the message that came from all participants, or a huge amount of participants here, was that this would be a wasted opportunity, an expensive wasted opportunity, and not the progressive realization of human rights if we spend the time and the resources on miniaturization and replication of institutional frameworks without changing the institutional culture. The third risk that was named in the debates was that the innovative services, or a kind of a piecemeal deinstitutionalization, may be created by the European funds without challenging and changing the mainstay of services, that they remain a kind of a pilot project, an EU-funded exception, while the mainstay of the services funded nationally is still of an institutional type, where the national resources keep flowing into long-established traditional institutional services. And this is also very worrying because, of course, as many have mentioned, it means that the dominance of the institutional model is not challenged, that the innovative services remain the exception to the rule, and indeed that when the EU funding stops, they might be financially unsustainable, and they may finish while the old-style institutions roll on. And also it was mentioned in our discussions with the presidency that there is an associated risk that even where the alternatives are being developed in a dynamic way, we shouldn't forget the people who are already in institutions. It shouldn't be just about preventing. It's very important to prevent new entries, but you shouldn't also forget people who already are in the institutions. You shouldn't write them off. On the level of solutions, there were a number that were addressed to the EU level, and they were very much linked to the correct use of the funds in line with the ex-ante conditionalities. There were many voices at this conference which were in favor of strengthening of the monitoring of the ex-ante conditionalities on the transition from institutional to community-based care, of ensuring more transparency and an efficient complaint system, more accountability. There were calls for strengthening the partnership principle and guaranteeing effective involvement of civil society, not just a formalistic one, not just a box-ticking exercise once in 6 months, as some of our participants said, but a real involvement. And let's be frank about that. The misuse of money, as also was mentioned, is always found out by the civil society. The civil society has a hugely important role as a watchdog. Also, at least in the corridors, we discussed the possibility of not just keeping the ex-ante conditionalities, but also extending them to other areas of EU policy, such as when the EU is funding projects in candidate countries, neighborhood countries, in the context of development. There is a need for policy consistency, and indeed we have also heard that there are some other financial instruments which could potentially undermine what is being done with these funds, so there is a need for consistency also internally. Now, you might feel that was enough on the EU level, but it wasn't, because the EU, as other speakers have said, also has other instruments. It has knowledge and can have more of it. It can have more of it if the research funds are used to generate better knowledge, and it already has very valuable knowledge, moreover, with a human rights perspective, emanating from the Fundamental Rights Agency and its research. There are indicators developed specifically for Article 19 of the CRPD by the Fundamental Rights Agency, I'm happy to say, using a methodology that was initially developed in the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And we very much encourage the European Commission to use that. Another aspect that was mentioned was the disability strategy. And I think among activists there is a feeling that a lot was achieved with the current disability strategy, and the priority on accessibility is well recognized, but that the next one should be even more forward-looking, and that it was a pity that the Article 19 issues were not identified as a key priority in the last one, and now they really need to be very much in the forefront. And here I add something, abusing my position as a Mexican visiting you just for 2 days. I wouldn't dare otherwise. But I've heard whispers in the corridors that the time is ripe for a Commission communication on the subject, on the transition from institutional to community-based services. So I'm throwing that into the debate. On the national level, the clear indication was that states need to follow the money. They need to have better data, and we in the broader society, in civil society, and in the European Commission, we need to know better what states are doing, what they are funding, because there are indications that in some states it just goes still overwhelmingly into institutional care, and it's spent on buildings, on various staff who wouldn't have to be there if it was person-centered services. That there are still in many states policies which provide perverse initiatives for institutionalization rather than for supporting families and so on. And we really need to ensure, states need to ensure, that when money is saved by closing institutions, that it really is redirected to the new type of services and not flown out into other domains of policies. On the national as well as on the regional level, on all implementation levels, in fact, the dimension of user involvement was highlighted. It was also a subject of a specific workshop, so I won't go into too much detail, but the emphasis was always on the co-production of the reforms, that these reforms shouldn't be just something that's top-down and imposed on the people. These people should be really involved, and not just as organizations, but also as the families and individual users. And a very important dynamic here is that, in line with the spirit of the convention, it has to move from kind of the overwhelming emphasis on, which has traditionally dominated, of needs assessment by professionals, to choice on part of the users who are, as we would say, rights holders. So it is what the users want and not just needs defined by the professionals. And the approach to individual users, we heard, needs to be coordinated so they don't have to interact with multiple authorities. And of course, it also is a communication issue. We need to make the choices understandable, and the choices have to be presented to them in a way which isn't manipulative. We discussed this with the presidency, and I think they have a very strong point here, that there is only so much that you can do through instruments of social policy as such, as policy that is implemented or designed by ministries of social affairs. And it really requires more than just one ministry, just one area of policy. Deinstitutionalization shouldn't be reduced, as we said, to just closing institutions, but it can't even be reduced just to closing institutions and creating new services to replace them. There are many other policies that come into play. From housing, we heard about housing first in relation to homeless people, but it's a broader policy issue. Transport in the context of accessibility, urban planning, education, employment, public procurement, research, and so on. Family support. Innovation. We heard that there is a great potential for learning from the private sector, from the business sector, as Scholt had said. And indeed, there are many inspiring histories there. We also heard from the presidency that there is often a discrepancy between the speed of technological change and the inertia of change in social policy. So yes, there is a lesson to be learned there as well. Solutions at national level, but with EU support. Here, I know there was a particular workshop on employment, but I would like to highlight what came out of that workshop, because it is hugely important. That is that the data show, and indeed they have shown it, as Christy Lynch from ESPD says, for 30 years now, that the model of supported employment, which focuses on first getting people into paid jobs on the open market, through a skills matching that fits the profile of the employee, future employee, and the employer, and then the people get trained on the job, but they're already getting a salary, that this is much more successful, much more motivating than the traditional training for training for training, this job preparedness ideology, which, as we have seen in many countries, has been very beneficial to a training industry, but much less so to the people who are being trained. And actually it can be terribly demotivating, because they're trained for years and years and never seem to get those jobs. So I'm saying that because this is a leitmotif of many advocates for supported employment, who are pointing out that supported employment may be more expensive per person, but it's more successful, vastly more successful. So that Christy Lynch, he says, if I'm not mistaken, that 85% of public support goes into job preparedness training, which has 15% success rate, and 15% goes into supported employment that has 85% success rate. We need to really focus on getting people into jobs. Getting them into jobs because they learn on the job, because they get a salary, because it's good for their self-esteem, and it is really part and parcel of the package of empowerment and emancipation. Now, of course, job quality is important, and accessibility, both physical accessibility and accessibility of new technologies is key in this regard. Final message, back to the main one. It's never too late to repeat the main message, which is, it is all about effective equality. We need personalized support services. We need empowerment of the users as rights holders. They need to be able to exercise their self-determination, their role as social beings. And the reforms which are required by this are profound reforms. They are paradigm shifts. We are not speaking of decorative changes or replication of institutional models from big, ugly, old ones to nice, little, small ones. That might look attractive to politicians, because it is attractive if one is a politician to come and cut ribbons. But the fact is that, as someone mentioned yesterday, most person-centered services are essentially invisible. It's very difficult to cut a ribbon on them. We have to live with that and still promote person-centered services. And the reforms have to be thought through with the people who are concerned. Finally, very, very finally, 3 memorable quotes. The first one is from my compatriot Jan Pfeiffer, who is the real inspiration behind the EEG and the real founder. And it's not even his quote. Pfeiffer is in a situation he can quote other people and have it attributed to him. He speaks about someone in Britain who says, it was crazy to take some of us out of society. And the beautiful word is us. These people are some of us out of society into the woods. Look what we as a society lose when we put some of us out. The other quote is from Churchill, but requoted creatively by Jana Hainsworth. So we attribute it to Jana Hainsworth. And it says, perhaps it is the end of the beginning. Maybe not the beginning of the end of institutionalization, but the end of the beginning. And that Jana said it in a context of evaluating what we had achieved since we started this European effort in 2009, what we had learned. Yes, it should be the end of the beginning. We should move into second stage now. And the final quote has to be from Gerard. It's about people's lives, not just about surviving. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jan. I think that I will not repeat, I will not try to summarize, but I think that you made clear that flying you over from Mexico is not a cost.
It was worth it.
It's an investment.
Yeah.
It's an investment. Please. If we are here together, and if we indeed had 2 fascinating days, then it is thanks to Wright. Wright, who sits here in front of us at the first row representing the Estonian presidency, who I think contributed a lot to formulating new policy objectives and taking stock where we are. Right, it's up to you to bring this conference to its very close. Please.
Thank you. Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really glad to be here and to kind of soon step step away from this podium and let you go home, because I'm now between you and home. Of course, I'm really happy because I see this gathering also as an investment. I personally have been in the business of deinstitutionalization since 1999, when I started my public sector career. First, I was heavily engaged in the criminal policy reforms, not only in Estonia, but also in developing countries. And I have done some consultancy as well, also for EU in that regard, also for different governments regarding alternatives and community sanctions and measures. The problems regarding deinstitutionalizations are quite universal. It doesn't really depend, in my opinion, what kind of sector we are looking at. The beauty of the presidency is that nevertheless of problems we have domestically, we still have opportunity also to raise those very big and important issues at the European level. So we are not here to advocate that Estonia does the best in European Union. We have our lessons learned, and we still probably keep getting those lessons. But it is important that we need to acknowledge that deinstitutionalization is something we need to talk about. And we need to make it a little bit higher and more important than single member state policies. So that's the idea why we started with deinstitutionalization discussions under the umbrella of our presidency as well. So we believe that in the social policy domain, and not only, of course, the prioritization of community-based solutions would lead us to better outcomes. Therefore, as a part of our presidency, we do not only point on the problem, but we also try to elaborate the concept which might empower us towards solutions further. So the concept of deinstitutionalization deserves more attention and our joint efforts. Well, the word deinstitutionalization is very difficult to pronounce in any language, I believe. Try to say out loud like 3 times very quickly. What will be the result? I have tried. It's quite difficult. It's very difficult to pronounce, but has very simple meaning. It speaks about empowerment of people, about respect to independent decision making. It is about life in dignity, nevertheless of the need for support. If we emphasize those values, we need to set community-based solutions for supporting everyone's individual coping with life challenges to forefront of our policies. It enables us to see improvements in our domestic systems, in the well-being of individuals, and empowers society in general. So let us not finish the discussion about deinstitutionalization, independent living, dignity, the value system of Europe here. We need to bring it further. For that purpose, as one goal of our presidency, we have prepared and proposed a draft of Council conclusions on accelerating community-based support for independent living, which we hope to be adopted in December. It is, I believe, another brick in the wall. It's just, let's say, one brick, but we need probably many more. But I'm really confident at looking at the discussions here that there already are so many efforts made, so we can build on that. It's the way forward. So now, within those 2 days, I think that we had right people, right expertise, and also a very nice atmosphere to continue in the future with a good collaboration. I would like to thank you for your participation. It is not easy to fly to Estonia for only a few days. I hope that we were able also to open a little bit our culture, country, and mentality. For that purpose, we even engaged an Australian to conduct an independent, scientific, and evidence-based evaluation on Estonia. Also on Latvia, as you heard. Not on Finland. Finnish colleagues were quite disappointed. But we will do it next time. We are very proud of our nature. One of my good colleagues from a neighboring country, from North, said yesterday that after seeing so many pictures of swamp, that he was wondering whether our presidency is intending to drive Europe to swamp. Well, it's the opposite. We really love our nature. We love our nature because it empowers us even at the turbulent times. We also believe that in order to preserve our way of living and strengthen Europe, we need to talk about values. And what is a better summary of it than agreeing that Europe stands for independent people living in dignity throughout their life course. In my opinion, that is our final outcome and conclusion of this gathering. Thank you. And one more remark. Big thank you to Luke and Liz for excellent moderating. Please.
Thank you.
And actually picking up from Luke's morning exercise, perhaps let's do it by the protocol now, by the new directive. Very controlled and EU kind of supported applause to everyone. Thank you.